Welcome to the Spiritual Life Pals podcast, where we take the spiritual approach to getting the most out of life, being real, and learning along the way. Join us on our journey so we can be each other's spiritual life pals. Hey everybody, welcome to the Spiritual Life Pals podcast. I am Ryan Wheeler, and with me is George Wheeler. George, would you like to say hello?
Welcome to the Spiritual Life Podcast. Hello, everybody. I am George Wheeler.
Wow. All right. Now, next time you say spiritual life, throw in pals at the end. That way we know that we're pals. All you said was spiritual life. This is the Spiritual Life Pals podcast.
It went into my head. It didn't come out my mouth.
Well, that's part of the equation, I guess. So what I was thinking was I wanted to give the audience a little bit to know about us and who we are. Like we want to make this like a fun, lighthearted spiritual podcast. It's one thing to go in and you know, like you're teaching people everything, but we're learning also. Like we're not complete, right, by any means. So I just wanted to ask us a couple questions. That's what this podcast is going to be about. The next couple podcasts, we are going to go over a specific topic and talk about how our spirituality applies to those specific topics. But for this one, let's start off with how we came to living a spiritual life. Are you okay with that?
I sure am.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go first. I think because I started first, actually, on a kind of a spiritual path. For me, it was growing up ever since I was 18 years old when I went to the military. You know, I didn't read any books really in high school, and in high school, I did well enough in school to play sports. And that's because you had to get a certain grade average to play sports. And that's really where I was at when it came to my education. So after high school, I didn't have any flair for college. So I went to the military, and I walked into a library because I was waiting for the pool hall to open one day. And I actually came across self-development books, which they didn't have in the libraries of our school. And the stuff I found in those books actually interested me. I actually found something that I was really passionate about. And self-development became, I consumed as much stuff on self-development, person development as I could, from Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar back then. And that learning self-development stayed with me for forever, ever since I was 18 years old. And it's for about 20 years. And I had gone through, the positive attitude, NLP, and everything else that's out there. And then when I was right around 38, I was just looking for something different in a bookstore, and I realized nobody was writing anything different. I was reading a book that was just put out by one of my favorite authors, and this book was saying the same thing that I had read from previous books, and I started thinking about that. I was like, well, he's not really saying anything new, so who actually does say anything to it? I realize this is coming from stuff in the 1920s and 1930s that Napoleon Hill wrote and some other great authors of self-development. So I was like, well, if he's talking about stuff that they wrote, what did they talk about? So I started looking at what were they, where was the source of their information? And I just kept doing that process of, okay, well, where did this person find this? And I found myself back talking to myself, I guess, but just reading books on like Greek philosophy and stuff like that. Well, where did they get this stuff from? And next thing I know, I'm in the back of the bookstore, the religious section. And I'm kind of going like, what the heck am I doing here? But that's where I found myself. So I realized that the source of a lot of things that people talk about, that the source of it was actually in some of the religious texts. But I wasn't really into that because religion didn't resonate with me. But then one day I was traveling, and I was back in the United States, and I wanted something to listen to when I went back to Malaysia. And I found Abraham Hicks, but it said the teachings of Abraham. And I really thought it was the teachings of Abraham as in like Abrahamic religion. And I just thought, I'll just get this. It was a special, it was on sale, and it had like 3 books in one. So I got it, and I took it home, and I put it in the CD player, and it started playing. And I was like, what on earth is this? I don't even know I shut it off after like 20 minutes. I was like, I don't really understand what they're doing. I don't understand any of this. And then but I took the Malaysia with me anyways. And I was making a trip from Penang to Kuala Lumpur, which is a 4-hour drive. And I took it with me. I thought, well, I'll listen to it, see what this was about. And by the time I got to I mean, I was so hooked from that moment on. The whole idea of manifestation, and I found that's when I learned what channeling was. I'd never really heard of channeling prior to that. But the things that she was saying for the first time, somebody was resonating with my thoughts and ideas of spirituality, not religion. And from
That's
that moment
exactly
on,
what it
I
is.
started to consume as much spirituality information as I could and going on my own spiritual journey.
Yeah, and I want to clarify that we're not like anti-religion, and if we have religious people, we actually kind of hope we have religious people listening to this. If we have Christians out there listening to this, like that's fantastic. If we have Buddhists, Islam, whatever it may be, whatever you may be, whatever you identify with, that's fantastic. I think we can all learn something from each other, and it's very narrow-minded, in my opinion, to just close off every other religion. They all have something to teach. You can go ahead and follow your dogmas and whatever you may do, but just realize that other religions have something to teach also. And the way we kind of approach spirituality is just kind of like this overarching idea. It's not one person that we follow; it's all of them. We try to absorb as much information from all of these people as we possibly can. And I my story is, well, I definitely beat you in age. It took you till you were like 38 or whatever you said.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that this is a
Yeah.
contest, but everything's a contest. Um,
But it's great. It's great to see the younger generations coming together.
yeah. So you sent me a book, and I
Yeah.
was about 20 years old when you sent it to me, and it was Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God. And I remember it's really funny because this whole lesson right here taught me a lot that I carry with me right now. And it's that you can't start someone on a spiritual journey until they're ready to embark on a spiritual journey. It has to be their choice. I've tried for years to get my wife to go on a spiritual journey with me. And she was raised as a Christian. And my whole life, basically up until my early 20s, I considered myself an atheist. So I would kind of debunk everything that she would say to me. Like I would try to basically just throw her off, and I realized how mean spirited that was at the time. My intention wasn't to help her. It was, and this takes the self reflection. Like we're going to talk a lot about self reflection, but my intention wasn't necessarily just to help her. It was to show her that she was wrong. Because if she was right, then I was in trouble. That was basically what it came down to.
Yeah.
But you sent me a book, Conversations with God, and I started. I think you actually sent me the Audible, right? Because
I sent you the book, and then later on, you bought the Audible. I
oh,
think.
okay. So you sent me the book, and I remember I started it, and I said to myself, so you sent me a hard copy, and I don't do hard copies, folks. I don't like to read, so I love to listen to audibles. I can listen all day. I have a hard time focusing, or I used to have a hard time focusing, and then actually this whole spiritual journey helped me with that too, which is kind of funny. But just to sit down, read a book was too much, so I bought the Audible. It was my only Audible book for years, and I started it, and I laid down on my bed, and I was like 20 years old, and I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty good stuff. Like this actually resonates with me a little bit. And then I fell asleep and I never turned that book back on for another 2 years at least. There was I just wasn't ready. Like it was great material and I was like, yeah. I remember having the skeptical thoughts of like conversations with God. Like really, he thinks he's talking to God. Like that's just silly, And I didn't understand it. And I'd hate to say like now I get it, but now I'm more aligned with where he was coming from. And it took me until my like I said, my early to mid 20s, I kind of came to this point in life where I wasn't at rock bottom, but I was like I was a little depressed. Like why do I get up in the morning? I would ask questions like that. Like what's the purpose of doing all of this? And eventually I had to come up with or I came up with like there has to be more to life than just getting up, going to work and going through the motions like everybody is doing. There has to be something, right? And then I was like, well, maybe there's not. So there was like this really depressing time of my life where I was trying to figure out the answer to that. And then I had the realization like either you choose to believe in something or you choose to not believe in something. And Albert Einstein said basically either everything's a miracle or nothing is. And I hold that quote like near and dear to my heart because what I get from that is that either we're here for a purpose and things are planned and we're supposed to be here, or nothing is a miracle and this is just all by chance and happenstance that we're here and there's no purpose for us being here. But I had the realization that I get to choose which one do I want to move forward with in my life with that backing. Am I here for a purpose or am I not? Is there a purpose behind all of this or is there not? So that's when I finally decided, you know what? I had to go find the password for my Audible because I was like, I got that book that Dad sent me years ago. I'll try to listen to it again. And man, when I made the decision that I was going to go on a spiritual path or have a spiritual journey, that book changed my life. And that book sparked a like a waterfall of books that I just started pouring my money into. I'm like, I need more of this. And I bought every spiritual book that had the word spiritual in it or what auras or whatever. Like I was totally hooked. I ended up with over 250 Audible books in my Audible account because I couldn't stop with the material. Like this stuff feels so right, I think is the right way to put it. Like when you know truth, when you hear truth, it gives you kind of like goosebumps, gives you people bumps, you know? And I was getting a lot of those while listening to this stuff. And you mentioned Abraham Hicks. And this is the cool thing about us. Like you love Abraham Hicks. You have a lot of her material. I've listened to Abraham Hicks and I think she's brilliant. I don't resonate with her as much, so I
Mhm.
don't really care to listen to her as much, but that doesn't mean I think she's wrong or that she's bad or whatever. I just think that we're on a different path is all.
And that's what's so cool about the material. That's why you can soak up so much spiritual material because everybody's giving it to you from a different angle. And you just take what resonates with you and you start to see how you can incorporate that into your life. Or sometimes you just listen to it to make yourself feel good.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't incorporate any of it. It just makes you feel good. And that's okay. And then sometimes you listen to something and you're like, I bought this Audible book and I kind of wish I could give it back. I didn't like it at all. And that's because no matter some spiritual teaching is they're all at different levels too. Sometimes I've listened to a spiritual book or read a spiritual book. I actually do like reading, so I don't just have hundreds of audibles. I have hundreds of books. So, but I'll pick up a book and I'll be like, I don't like this book. But then as I've grown spiritually, all of a sudden that book started to make sense, and I was like, oh, that was a great book. I wonder why I didn't really read it a couple of years ago. So it's kind of like what Ryan said with you. You have to be ready for the material, and when you're ready for the material, it's there for you.
It's amazing, they say like when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Hmm.
I've read the same books over or I'm sorry, I've listened to, let me correct myself. I've listened to the same books over and over again, and every time I do, I'm further along my journey and more understanding. And the books, it's like reading a whole new book. Like the material is completely fresh. I've already read it, I've already listened to it, but I get something completely different from it. And I find that fascinating about spiritual books. And I've also had spiritual books where I'm not going to throw them out there, but there's books where spiritual books where I've listened to them and afterwards I went, I could have wrote that. Like at the place that
Yeah,
I'm at right now, and I'm not saying that's a bad
yeah,
thing. That's not a bad
no,
thing at all. Actually, I take pride in where I am in my spiritual journey. And I just think like, well, I didn't really get anything from that. And that's when we just like when that started happening, I started we started doing things like writing Zenployee and
yep.
I started taking voice notes. Like you've been doing that for years. You'd say, Ryan, just take voice notes when you have these thoughts that come through. And I'd be like, I'm not doing that. That's so lame. And now I take voice notes every day. So, But
You know, it's funny. You know, that's really quick. I don't mean to interrupt you, but reading the same book at different points along your journey is kind of funny because it reminds me of watching a Disney movie when you're a child, and the movie's funny and it's fun as a kid, but you watch it when you're older, as you're an adult, and you're like, "There's so much adult material in there that I didn't get when I was a kid."
yeah,
It's the same thing.
100%. You become you're not becoming more of an adult. You're becoming more open. I think is what a big
Yeah.
part of it is.
Just because we understand more things. So the jokes that were actually meant for the parents there to keep them entertained, also, you get them.
Right.
It's no different than in spirituality. They say something that you didn't quite, you did, it just went right over your head the first time you heard it. But then when you start to understand things more, you're like, oh, that's so profound.
There, you'll have a lot of those moments, and I have a feeling that if we have a podcast called Spiritual Life Pals, people who are listening to this are probably pretty spiritual, so they've probably had a lot of those like, oh, that's amazing moments while
Yeah.
listening to books, and maybe hopefully once or twice during our however many episodes we end up putting out for this podcast, people hear that us and go, oh, that's amazing. And I just want to make it clear that we're aware that there's people laughing in the background, and we're just gonna roll with it. Like we can't control. This is a this is a big thing that George and I deal with in our personal lives. Like we can't control our environment. All we control is ourselves. So we're hoping that if you hear the laughing in the background, the talking, that hopefully it's not distracting. But if it is, you know, hopefully you can work through it and listen to the material instead. But we are aware, and future podcasts will try to make it our surroundings as easy as on the listeners' ears as possible. But it is what it is, and we just want to get this material out there, so we're rolling with it for today. So our main overarching idea for I'm going to use that word a lot apparently tonight. Overarching is that when it comes to spirituality, is that everything is one part of a whole. Okay, that's where we come from, and you may hear that, and you may either not understand it, you may disagree outright, and that's totally fine. We don't think that you're wrong. We don't think that our understanding of life is better in any way because we also believe that um, everyone is perfectly where they're supposed to be, and you'll get to where you're going in time, or you won't. And I say, and I say that, but and it's not funny, but it is, and it's not.
It happens.
Yeah, it happens. Like you just have to accept that people are exactly who they're supposed to be, and you don't need to change them. You don't need to make them conform to your ideals. They just let them be. If we just let people be, and we were polite and kind, and we respected everybody, how much different would the world be? You know, don't try to.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make you conform to my ideas. I accept you for who you are, and I love you for that. Um,
Thank
so
you.
that's our basic idea of spirituality is everything is one. Everything comes from one loving source, and we're here to experience it. We are a part of that source experiencing itself. Is that something that you can relate to?
I can relate to that.
Okay.
And it's funny because when you look at your fundamental principles of what guides you, and we even talk about, we talk all the time. And we were talking about this the other day, and it comes down to, we're like, well, fundamentally thinking, these are the things I believe in. And then you keep getting back to, well, where does that come from? Where does that come from? Where does that
Yeah.
come from? And then it goes, well, inevitably it comes from everything is, at first it was kind of like everything is love, but then it's kind of like, well, if everything is love, then everything is one.
Yeah.
And absolutely, we as you listen to this podcast, you're going to find that, yes, Ryan and I have a lot of the same basic principles that we believe in, and yet we both come at them from different perspectives. So that's
Yeah.
why this is going to be truly kind of exciting sometimes, because we may not always even agree.
Right.
Because just because we agree on a topic doesn't mean we agree on how to get there, or what it means to each of us. It might mean something different, and that's based on our knowledge, our experiences, and the things that we've learned, and maybe the way we've applied in our lives.
And what's crazy is when we don't agree, I still respect you. Like
Well,
that's
that's
your
nice.
truth, man. Like I'm such a good kid. No,
It's
like don't cry.
better.
So So I still respect you though. Like I respect and I respect those who come up to me and say, and I do have people that come up to me if they know that I consider myself a spiritual teacher. I wrote in spiritual literature, but like people come up to me and say, I don't necessarily believe in what you think, and I think that's kind of bogus. And I'm just like, that's fantastic. I hope that whatever it is that you believe, I hope that it works for you,
Yeah.
and that's it. I don't. I'm not here to tell you why you're wrong and why I'm right. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to just show and like give our understandings of life and how they relate to all these questions now and topics. Now, the next question I have is like, what if people are wondering how can I get my family to open up to spiritual ideas? And I already touched on this, but I think the main point that I want to get across is that it's not up to you to get your family to agree with you. And I went through this for years with my wife. Her family is very religious, and I wanted to be seen as an equal in their eyes, and in her eyes, and my wife's eyes. And she wasn't one to judge me. She wanted to take me to church and stuff like that. So I went, and I don't want to say I didn't like it, but it didn't feel right to me. It was as simple as that. And after I kept trying to get my wife to like, and after this was like, so I said that I started off atheist and I was trying to basically debunk all of her beliefs and all that. And then eventually I was like, oh my God, you weren't wrong on most of this stuff. Like a lot of your fundamental beliefs are really good beliefs. That we're just not quite aligned the same way. So I would try to like sway her towards my side, like take the spiritual approach, not just the Christian approach, right? And it doesn't work, people. Oh, I got a fly buzzing around. Um, it just doesn't work. You can't. What happens is if you resist, what you resist persists. So if she's trying to tell me something in Christian terminology, and I say like that doesn't make any sense, and I resist it, what's going to happen is she's going to try to find ways to prove it right. And then while she's doing that, she's simultaneously going against my beliefs because if our beliefs are opposed, if she's digging deeper into hers, then she's digging deeper into splitting us apart, not like personally, but spiritually. So resisting people's beliefs does not work. Accept people for who they are. They will get there in time or they won't. It's not up to you to get them to conform to your spiritual ideas. All you can do, this is my best advice and this is what I've learned, and it took me, I think, 5 years now to learn this. The best you can do is be the demonstration of the person that you want to be. And if they see you and they go, how did they just handle that situation so stoically? How did they handle that situation stoic? I'm not sure if that was the right word. So like so well. Stoically, like they were just staring like
Now, I think centered. Like you're steady in a
right,
situation where maybe they weren't, but they can feed off that steadiness.
right. So yeah, so they look at you and they go, "Wow, that they just handled that really well." And they won't say it, of course, because that would give you they'd be nodding their or tipping their cap to you. But
Hmm.
it'll be in their head and it'll fester. And I'm not trying to say that we need to manipulate our friends and family, but if you're
Oh,
being the best version of yourself, what's going to happen is people are going to go, "I don't know how this lady can do this. How are they so calm? How do they feel like they're always in control? How do they feel like they're inspiring me?" You know what I mean? Like so, do you have any advice to how can I get my family to open up to my spiritual ideas? Even though I just said you shouldn't, basically.
you know, it's funny because as you were kind of going along there, you took my whole point at the end of what you were saying. You just be who it is that you are, and moments are going to come up that are teaching moments where somebody's going to look at you and say, I really like the way you handled that. And again, it is. I think when you go through this process, you become that example of, and not on a purpose, just by being who you are, you become an example
Yeah,
of either, especially if you have a family, for a spouse, for your children. Is this an example of what I want to, of a person I want to be with, or somebody I want to be like, or is this not an example of that? And I think that's where it really gets to, when they start seeing you behaving in a certain way, or you're doing certain things, especially if it's a change in your life. Like, this person's really changed. They used to be like the
Yeah.
opposite almost with it. I can't believe that the growth that they've had personally, and that's what it really comes down to is you can have self development growth, you can have, you can have family growth, business growth, but spiritual growth will take you further than anything else.
And I think that's a good way to put it. Like, we are pro um, personal growth, we are pro family growth, but the reason why we focus on spirituality is because we feel like it covers all of those things. If you work on personal growth, you might not also be working on family growth. If you work on family growth, you might be giving up your um like creating good habits and stuff for yourself. What happens with spirituality is if you work on your own spirituality, you start to be a better husband, wife, family member in general. You start to be a better a coworker, maybe a better boss. Like, you start realizing that everybody is their own person, and you don't need to control them. And when you stop trying to control people, believe it or not, people start listening to you more often, which is, it's funny the way that works.
Yeah, you start listening more and talking less,
Yeah.
and you actually will come across as more caring, more empathetic, more compassionate. And I think, would you rather be known as that, or the guy who thinks they know it all, or the guy who has to
Right.
get the last word in? The qualities of somebody who is on a spiritual journey, oftentimes, there's two kinds of people I think are on a spiritual journey. There's a person on a spiritual journey, and they want to tell everybody they're on a spiritual journey. Right?
Yeah.
That means they still have a lot of work to do.
That was us. That was me for sure. I would tell everybody, like, dude, I would go around and I'd ask my friends, "Do you guys want to join a spiritual, like, join me on a spiritual journey?" And I had one that said yes. And guess what? The next day, he was out because he wasn't ready.
Yeah, exactly.
And the rest of
It's
them
not
just told me
something.
no.
Yeah, if you it's the same thing with religion. I think you can't force somebody. You can teach somebody to church, but you can't force them to believe in the ideas that are coming from the church. So it's the same thing with any spiritual or religious thing. You can't force somebody into it. They have to want it, and they have to want it by seeing that it would benefit them in their lives. And if you're doing things, like, say you're on a spiritual journey, but you're always talking about it, and you're talking about how you believe it and what you believe is right and everything else is wrong, you see that with a lot of new age people. Whereas, no, our ways, why this is why religion is no good. And it's like, no, I would never say that to anybody,
Yeah.
because hopefully, if you're on a religious path, that religious path gets you to where you want to go. And
Right.
that's what we're kind of hoping happens, even because you could take that, and you could take what we talk about, and you can kind of combine all that stuff to just have a more fulfilling journey.
Yeah. Your beliefs, your thoughts, your actions, they all lead you to exactly where you are. If you realize that you're in a place that you don't want to be, this was exactly what happened to me when I was in my early 20s. Um, I realized I wasn't where I want to be. So I said, well, either I can wait for the world to change, or I can start doing the things that to put me in a spot to be the person that I want to be. So I had to change a lot. Like, I had to work on my thoughts. I had to work on pretty much everything. Like, I was kind of a jerk, especially in high school. If you ask people in high school that knew me, like what was he like? They'd probably be like, "Oh, he was kind of a jerk." He was like biggest ego, and ironically, I would say I had the biggest ego, and I was voted biggest ego in my senior book, school book or yearbook, whatever that thing was called.
But you were probably high fiving yourself, like, yeah,
Oh yeah, I was doing like the I don't know, a flexing motion of some sort,
yeah.
but and I thought that was funny, but inside, even at that time, I remember thinking to myself, "Why the heck do they have the biggest ego award? Like, that is a slap in the face." And I got voted for it. But I
Yeah.
had to pretend, the thing was I had to pretend like I was proud of it, because my ego, my ego was like, "Dude, you just won biggest ego award. You That's a slap in the face." But then, my ego's like, "Well, guess what? We're gonna run with that and make everybody feel like they're idiots for voting us biggest ego," which is just obviously a big ego thing to do. And I didn't recognize that then, and I do now. That's the self reflection part that we will talk a lot about, um, going through all of these podcasts. Is self reflection. Um, it's funny because my wife is sitting in the other room. She just texted me. She said, I was scared of you in high school. so,
That's funny. That is
so
funny.
that's the person that I was. I wasn't scary because I would beat people up. I was scary because I was, you know, put offish. Like, don't look at me, don't talk to me. Like, I'm better than you. That's how it. That's just it wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true. But I had that persona so that people wouldn't mess with me. I was very fragile in high school, and I know that now. I didn't know that then. So
That's how most people who are though, who put off that big, the bigger the persona people try to put off, usually the more fragile they are.
yes, that's something that I've learned, and I catch myself to this day when I am putting on a show or I get mad at somebody. I ask myself like, why are you mad at that person? And the answer is always like, I'm trying to put them down to build myself up. I must be having a
Yeah,
bad moment. You know,
yeah,
I've never picked on anybody in my life with the intention of loving them. Every time I've ever picked on somebody, it's always because I'm saying, you are less than me. And when you do that, the ego says, therefore, I am better than you. That's why you put people down. That's why you have those negative thoughts. And then when you start catching those thoughts and you start saying, you know, why did you just think that?
yeah.
That's a deep spiritual thing in and of itself because you're not identifying with your thoughts anymore. You're saying, what is it that just noticed that thought that just came through? And that leads me to our my next question is, George, are we enlightened?
I'm not. I'm on a path. I think that could lead me to there someday. But am I today, as I am? I would say no. I think have I ever had a moment where I thought I was resonating perfectly with kind of all everything as one? I can actually say, yeah, I've had great spiritual moments where I felt so good, and I just knew that I was one with everything. But I have not been able to keep like in that moment all the
Right.
time. So,
So
am I enlightened? No, I'm not enlightened. But I love where I am on my spiritual journey.
so it's funny because I had to take notes for these questions, and when I asked myself initially, like, am I enlightened? Right? The ego goes, yes, you are. But obviously that's the self-check thing where you go, okay, let's calm down. And then the answers start coming through. Like when you're no longer identifying as the body and you start to raise yourself up and just try to feel good. And when you put yourself in this state of love, you might say that you can channel your higher self, or however you may put that. Um, when I said that, like, are we enlightened? The answer came through so clear. As soon as you say that you're enlightened, you're no longer enlightened. And that's because there's no one to be enlightened. And I'm not sure if anybody will understand what I just said, but as soon as you say, and I hope somebody does, as soon as you say, I am enlightened, as soon as you say, I am anything, you're identifying with this physical person. But a truly enlightened perspective doesn't have an identification. It is one with all. Therefore, how could one with all be enlightened unless everything is enlightened, which everything is? But that's a different story for a different day.
Yes,
Now,
great topic
now
too someday.
that is a good topic. We'll have to write that down. but
Hmm.
but yeah, like you said, enlightenment isn't like a milestone. Like, hey, I had an enlightened moment, therefore now I am forever enlightened. That's not really how it works. I have had those same moments as you've had where you feel like you're in resonance with everything.
Hmm.
Um, one day I asked myself, or I didn't ask myself, I put it out there into the universe. I just said, you know, um, I was thinking about this sort of stuff along these lines, and I said, do animals have a soul? Right? And I just sat there and I cleared my mind, tried to get my thoughts and all that out of the way, and a very clear answer came through, and it said, I am that. And then when that came through, I didn't even necessarily understand what it meant, but I couldn't move. My body went completely numb. My legs, I couldn't stand. I couldn't think. I was sitting and I was staring and I couldn't do anything when that happened. And that was the my highest moment, I think, of realization. And that moment right there is the reason why I can never, ever not be on a spiritual journey. Because as soon as I go, but what about that moment that you had, that you experienced, personally experienced? I didn't hear this in a book. I didn't hear this on a podcast. This was a personal moment for me. It was the most real thing that I've ever experienced. And at that moment, I was done. Like, I was like, if I wasn't already committed to a spiritual life, I sure am now. I I had a it took me a little bit to be able to gather myself, about 10 minutes. I was at work, so I'm surprised I didn't get in trouble. I was just sitting still for 10 minutes. But at the time, my wife and I we were trying to conceive a baby, and it had been a couple of years that we were trying, afterwards, I had the clear thought intention to just ask again, like, are we ever going to have a baby? And the clear answer was, you will have a baby. Like, it just came through. I didn't. It wasn't me saying, yeah, we'll have a baby. It was just this very clear understanding. We'll have a baby eventually. I came home that day. I told my wife um, of this moment, and I said, we're gonna have a baby. Like, I don't know when, but we will. I promise. It, there's no doubt in my mind. And sure enough, a couple months later, I have a beautiful baby girl. So
And really, that's actually a great segue into the next topic, because when you have those moments of feeling you're everything one with everything, I think the only feeling you really have is love.
yeah,
And that's kind of what we want to talk about here is kind of like, what does love mean to us? And truly, there's so many ways we use love during the course of the day. I love my cat. Right? Oh, I love to play baseball. I love to watch football. I love to do this. Oh, I love my wife. I love my children. But what is, we throw the word out there so much. The word loses its meaning. When you have that feeling, I'm here to tell you, when you have that moment, that spiritual moment when you really feel like you're one with everything, it's ineffable. You can't really describe it anymore. But all you know is that feeling you're having is something you've never felt before.
yeah,
And it is true, just love for everything. At that moment, you don't dislike people for being Republicans or Democrats. You don't dislike people for being Christian or Muslim. You don't dislike people for anything. Nothing, none of that matters. None of those words matter. None of those labels matter. Nothing matters. You just feel love for everything. And to me, that's 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 truly, it calibrates you. It's kind of like some people could break a fingernail and they go into this complete drama because they've never actually hurt themselves before. And yet somebody who's had a pretty major accident where you've broken a couple bones, you're like, that's it, you broke a fingernail. Um, when you've felt that, when you've had that moment, you will know that kind of like, this is what love is.
yeah, yeah. There's no feeling like it, and when you have that experience, another very clear understanding that I had was that didn't necessarily come from out there. That was me basically just aligning with something in here. And I don't even necessarily, it's very hard to to explain this stuff. Spirituality, this is funny. Spirituality is the
Yeah.
hardest thing to explain. It is, especially moments of spiritual realization and stuff like that, because you can't convince somebody of what you went through. It's not up to me to convince you that what I just said was true. It, I don't care if you
But
believe
wait
it.
a minute. Here's the thing, and this is why, if you start to tell somebody and they start to like, well, you didn't really, if they want to argue or debate you in that moment, it's not debatable
Right,
because you know what you went through. You know what you felt. It's not debatable.
right.
So you can't get mad at somebody for not understanding
No,
because they've never had it.
but you understand because you were that person up until that point. Like, I
Yeah,
totally
exactly.
get that, because if anyone ever told me that they went through that moment, I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Stop it. You did not. You were
You had a gas bubble. You were frozen. You were, you know.
yeah, an alien came down, and like, I believe in that instead of the actual, like, you had a true spiritual
But
experience."
you,
But
but seriously, like you don't get upset with people like don't understand it, because until they live, until they've experienced it, they're not going to understand it, and you can't adequately explain it to them.
Right. So it's not up to you. This all goes back to like telling your family, that they should start a spiritual path. It's not up to you to get
Yeah,
them going. It's up to them, and that's
yeah.
something they have to decide completely on their own. The best thing you can do, but this isn't. So we're going to be talking about different topics like we've discussed, and one of the things is like parenting that we're going to be discussing, and how to live like a spiritual parenting.
A spiritual. So
I
it's a
just combined
parent.
those
It's a
two words.
bird.
Uh,
It's a bird parent.
no, it was
Sparrow.
spiritual and parenting together.
It's
But it like the best thing that I've learned to do is just to be. This all goes back to the same thing though. Like be who you know yourself to be in front of your kids all the time, as often as possible. And the more aligned you can be with that person, who your higher self, you may say, the most often you can do that, they see that. They grow up with that. Now, if you're someone who fluctuates from trying to be your higher self to being a egotistical maniac to being someone who yells all the time to being someone who's happy and giving kisses and tickles and stuff like that, they see that. Now, as a kid growing up, they say, "Wow, my parents crazy." If they're and most kids do think that about their parents, but it's a great journey for me right now, the place that I'm in, where I get to try to be that consistent me that I want to be for my child so that they grow up and say, what was it that allowed my dad to have that understanding or to act that way in that situation?
exactly. And, one thing I say, you said, a lot of parents, and it depends how you work your spirituality, of course, they think their parents are lame. A lot of kids, I'm sorry, I think their parents are lame. Oh, my dad's lame. My parents are lame. They don't understand me. And I'm here to tell you that some people, when they go on a spiritual journey, it becomes all about you being on your spiritual journey. So whether you spend hours meditating, some people like to do that. I'm telling you, work spirituality into everything that you do. Work spirituality into your life. Work spirituality into how you handle your children. Spend time with them in a loving, kind of nurturing environment, and play with them, have fun with them. Those are, just that feeling, that feeling that you get, that good feeling, I should say, that you get when you're having fun, is a spiritual moment.
Yeah.
If you let it be, and some people think, well, spirituality is, I can't have fun, right? It's because it's all about being centered. No, you can have fun, but
You will have fun
yeah,
along
exactly, you
along a
will.
spiritual journey.
But
It's the
you
most
have
fun
to
I've
work
ever
it into
had.
your life. Work it into your life, and your kids, they'll never think you're lame. As a matter of fact, because you don't ever really lose your cool, like you could be cool and not lose your cool. You never really get, yeah, you could be happy for your kids and you could do things, but you never get really angry. And yeah, but you can still have fun,
Yeah.
smile. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And that like when you're at work, a lot of people have a work self. When you're parenting, you have a parenting self, and when you're home with your spouse alone, you have a home with your spouse alone self. If you're reading a book about self development, you have a self development self. Like everyone wears 1,000 hats. That's just what we do. We go through and we become a different person depending on what we're doing and who we're doing it with. The thing about we talked about this earlier with spirituality, when you make that your focal point, it it is the overarching, there's that word again. It's the
Good
overarching
job.
impact.
Way to whip that in.
I did too on purpose. Um, it has that impact on everything. Eventually, you become a spiritual father. You become a spiritual worker. You become a spiritual lover. Like all of those things are connected now, and you can always fall back on who you are and your true self. And
So I have a good one for you. Actually, are you ready for
uh
this?
oh,
Everybody wears 1,000 hats, but you only have one head.
oh,
What is the foundation that you're laying that hat on top of?
mic drop. No. But so you asked the question, what does love mean to us? And we just went through and described like, the feeling of love and all that. But the closest thing, and I don't know that this is true, this is just my personal experience. The closest thing that I have ever come to um experiencing love outside of that spiritual moment that I had, and I've had a couple of them, but just that specific one, was receiving undivided attention from somebody. Unconditional, undivided attention, where they're not judging me. They're just listening. And I realized that attention itself, that pure, loving attention, is what I equate to almost like bliss. The best thing you can do for somebody, for your child, in my opinion, the best thing you can do for your child, for your wife, your husband, your significant other, is give them your attention. Put your phone down. Turn the TV off. Stop doing a podcast. I'm gonna get my wife because right now. I'll be right back. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry here. Um,
You can do that in a few minutes.
give them your unconditional love with your attention. It's as simple as that. When your spouse is talking to you, I struggle with this still. I still struggle with this as far as I feel like I've been along my journey. When my wife is talking to me, a lot of times I'm thinking about something else. And if I'm thinking about something else, I'm not giving her my unconditional love and attention. And it's very hard. And it takes a
And they
lot of
know
patience.
that. They know
We're
that.
we're in a world where we're constantly bombarded with just it's one thing after the other. And it's so
Yep.
hard to slow down. But when you learn how to slow down, it's so important.
And you can't fake that. You can't like, yeah, I'm listening. They know when you're not truly listening because they've been with you when you were there, present and attentive. So if you're there and your answers are just either, well, if you're listening, that's great. But if people can tell when you're not present
Yeah.
and giving them that attention.
I think everyone's talked to somebody, and while they're talking, you realize that you could stop talking or completely change the subject,
Yep.
and they wouldn't even notice.
Yep.
That that is them focusing their love and attention on something else, and it's not
Yep.
you, and that's why you feel it, is because you know you're not the one receiving that love and attention. Um, do you have anything else that you want to hit on with like where is love? I know that I wrote down in my notes like that we believe that love is just the source of all that is. It's some people call it God, some people call it the universal energy.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't think we need anything here because it's going to come up so many times in podcasts that we
oh
do.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so the last question that we have here is, I just thought this was interesting. I just want to throw this out there. I mentioned it a couple times, like my quote unquote higher self, which I don't even necessarily believe in that phrase, but I know a lot of people can relate to it, so I use that a lot. But how do I know when my higher self is talking? Is it the same voice in my head as my normal everyday thought voice? And a lot of people, I've actually heard a lot of people say like, I don't have a voice in my head, and and they may be true. That might be true. I don't know. But as soon as you point out like, well, don't say this, but think something in your head real quick, and they're like, okay. It's like, well, what it's not an actual voice that you're hearing in your head. It's a narration more than it is anything. Like no one, I mean, so I'm sure some people have like a voice in their head, but when I say the voice in your head, it's that narration inside. So I think that most everyone probably has that, even the people that don't think that they do. But it's just the narration in your head. Um, so how do you know when it's your higher self that's talking and not just George?
I think the best way to say that is one, a lot of times it happens when you ask a question.
Mm,
I'll just ask myself a question, or I'll just be thinking something and I'll ask a general question. And I won't even be thinking about an answer. I'll just be asking a question and an answer will come back to me that just feels good.
or
Um,
floors you, right? Like you're like, wow.
yeah, it's fun. It's not always a loving answer. Sometimes it's just slap in the face.
It
Reality. Holy cow. Like I've had that where I've asked a question. Like one day I was sitting there, I was driving down the road and I'm like, I can't remember what was on the radio. They're talking about the Kardashians or something. I'm like, why on earth does anybody even care about? And then this answer came back like, why do you care about what people think about the Kardashians? Like,
yeah. S- So you said it's not always a loving answer. And this is fantastic. This is probably one of the first times that we've disagreed, because I would say that that was the most loving answer that you could have received in that moment.
Well, what I mean though is it's not gonna be like fluff. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
right.
It's sometimes it's just very direct, and it's exactly what you need to hear in that moment. But you know something? But what's funny about that is when I said that and I got that answer, I started laughing out loud
Yeah.
because it was just so. I was like, ah, "That's so funny." It was like, but it wasn't like I said it to my. It wasn't like I said it, then I said it to myself, and I started laughing because I'm crazy. I said it. I don't know where that answer came from. Right?
Yeah.
The answer just came to me. The answer, it still felt good because it was like, oh my God, I can't believe that is, I was here. I was complaining and I said, well, why are you complaining about people, like complaining about
Yeah.
complaining? It's like, but the answer, it just made me laugh out loud.
That is very funny. I think that the way that I most can tell the difference between my ego self and maybe just not myself answering my questions is the ego typically wants to come back with either a negative or a fearful response. And a lot of times you'll catch yourself, like you'll pose a question and you'll try to sit there and you'll try to figure out the question, right? And when you're sitting there trying to figure out the question, a lot of times you'll start reflecting on personal experiences and negativity, or some sort of fearful event or whatever, and then you get to an answer and you go, "Aha, my higher self just answered that." And then you realize that the answer is like that person's an idiot. That's why they did that to you. Well, that's not from your higher self. I can tell you
Mm-mm.
that. I promise you that if you ever get a response that's like you should definitely hurt that person. That definitely, that person does not deserve to have anything good in their life. That's not your higher self, folks. If everything is one and everything is loving, why would the loving response be that that person's not equal to you? That just doesn't make any sense. And another thing is that a lot of the times my higher self's voice doesn't come through in my head. I don't necessarily hear it. I feel it. I feel when something is right or something is wrong. I say, when I get done with this podcast, should I go get a cookie? Or I'm going to go get a cookie. Okay. And my ego goes, uh, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that because it's late at night and whatnot. And then it goes, well, actually, you worked pretty hard doing that podcast. You might actually want to go get a cookie after all. And then, but when that happens in my head, there's this, you know, inside that's not the right answer. That subtle, like, guide, I suppose, is a good way to put it. That subtle guide, if you tune into it and you actually listen to it, first of all, it gets louder. The more you listen to it, that intuition, a lot of people call it, the more you listen to your intuition, the louder it gets. The less you stop listening to your thoughts, and the more you start tuning into um, your truth, the way things make you feel, that is your higher self, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny as you're talking about, I was thinking one of the things that I notice is when if you ask, especially if you ask a question, the answer never comes back starting with the word I. Oh, I think, like
Yeah.
the answer will come back and it'll be like somebody is literally talking to you, not I pulled this answer out of my memory or my experiences.
That's very interesting. That's another great way that I totally forgot to write down, but that is a great way that I also know. Like, it's not, oh yeah, I should do this. It comes almost from outside of you. It's
Yeah.
weird, but it all is inside you. That's the thing. Like these answers aren't. It's not like you're tapping into necessarily a wavelength. You're tapping into a vibration, and vibration is everywhere, and therefore the thoughts are instantaneous that come through. The higher self thoughts, they come through instantaneously because they're not apart from you. You are that higher self also, or
Yep.
all the time. But you have to choose to either resonate with that or resonate with who you think yourself to be, the story that you've created so far in your experience of life. You always have to choose either to be that person or the person who is one with everything. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about? This was a
Tell you what,
very
Go ahead and finish that first.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say this was a very more serious conversation. There was some fun, there was some laughs,
Sure.
but this was a very good way to get across who we are, what our basic foundation of thought is, and where we come from, and a lot of the stuff that we just talked about is how we're going to answer the majority of our topics that we come up with.
Absolutely. And that's why I said, like, you would go on level. Don't worry about it. They'll come up with other podcasts. We don't have to finish it here. Right. We can talk about these things later, because people will ask us questions, and those questions will come from a different perspective, and we'll answer it based on that perspective. So even though we might give an answer on the same topic, it comes from two different perspectives and can almost seem like two different answers, but it's really just what that person's ready to hear. But you started saying something there. The stories that you tell yourself are so important, because that's what you'll live your life by. What story do you say about yourself? What story do you say about your upbringing? What story do you say about the stories you tell yourself? And you have the ability to write the story for the future. And what foundation do you want to put behind you to start writing that future story? Because it doesn't have to be the same story of your past. And that's why the spiritual journey is so important, because when you start understanding it and start tapping into that vibration that Ryan is talking about, that's that loving, compassionate energy that is out there that can guide you. Sometimes you need people's help. That's why there's spiritual coaches out there. Sometimes you need people's help. But at the same time, it's all within you. Just like Ryan said, it's within you. And then the stories you tell yourself going forward can be different. So it doesn't matter if you're an addict to whether it's your phone or drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, that it's a story you're telling yourself, and you can move forward with a different story. And that's kind of what we're here to do, is tell stories to get people to say, to have that kind of aha moment maybe. And so, you know what, that resonated with me, what they said, and it felt good. And I'd like to take what they just said and implement that in my life, or how can I use that in my life to make my life better? That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for. We are your spiritual life pals, and any of our community is. We're not just your spiritual life pals. You're our spiritual life pals. If we're connecting through our community on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, whatever it may be, wherever you get your podcasts, we're a part of each other's journey at that point. And we look forward to bringing you whatever sort of topics and insights, and every episode will be labeled with the topic that we talk about, so that people can filter which topics they are really interested the most. I would recommend, obviously, that you listen to every podcast, because we're going to come from a different perspective on every podcast. But is there anything else that you wanted to mention, George? Or are we ready to sign off?
I'm ready to sign off, and I really look forward to talking to everybody again next week.
All right, sounds great. We will talk to you all next week on Thursday. Have a great week.
Take care, everybody.
The show is over, and you are still listening? My goodness, you are a true spiritual life pal. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join your spiritual life pals. If you haven't already, we would so appreciate it if you would subscribe to us wherever you are listening to your podcasts and review the show. To join the Spiritual Life Pals community, join our YouTube channel, Facebook group, or Instagram at Spiritual Life Pals, or follow us on Twitter at Spirit Life Pals. If you have any questions or insights that you would like for us to share on our podcast, please send us a voicemail on our website at spirituallifepals.com, or message us on any of the social media platforms I just mentioned. We appreciate you, and we will be here again next week.